There Was a Country by Chinua Achebe, the case against the Nigerian government. It is important to point out that most Nigerians were against the war and abhor the senseless violence that ensued as a result of the conflict. Gowon's wartime cabinet, it should also be remembered, was full of intellectuals like Obafemi Awolowo and Anthony Enahoro, and super permanent secretaries like Alison Akene Ayida, among others, who came up with a boatload of infamous and regrettable policies. A statement credited to Chief Obafemi Awolowo and echoed by his cohorts is the most callous and unfortunate. All is fair in war, and starvation is one of the weapons of war. I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat in order for them to fight harder. It is my impression that Chief Obafemi Awolowo was driven by an overriding ambition for power, for himself in particular, and for the advancement of his Yoruba people in general. And let it be said that there is, on the surface at least, nothing wrong with those aspirations. However, Awolowo saw the dominant Igbos at the time as the obstacle to that goal, and when the opportunity arose, the Nigerian-Biafra War, his ambition drove him into a frenzy to go to every length to achieve his dreams. In the Biafran case, it meant hatching up a diabolical policy to reduce the numbers of his enemies significantly through starvation, eliminating over 2 million people, mainly members of future generations. If Gowon was the Nigerian Abraham Lincoln, as Lord Wilson would have us believe, why did he not put a stop to such an evil policy, or at least temper it, particularly when there was international outcry? Setting aside for the moment the fact that Gowon, as head of state, bears the final responsibility of his subordinate, and that Awolowo has been much maligned by many, an intellectual, for this unfortunate policy and his statements, why, I wonder, would other thinkers such as Ayide and Enahoro not question such a policy but advance it? The federal government's actions soon after the war could be seen not as conciliatory but as outright hostile after the conflict ended. The same hardliners in the federal government of Nigeria cast Igbos in the role of treasonable felons and wreckers of the nation, and got the regime to adopt a banking policy which nullified any bank accounts which had been operated during the war by the Biafrans. A flat sum of £20 was approved for each Igbo depositor of the Nigerian currency, regardless of the amount of deposit. If there was ever a measure put in place to stunt or even obliterate the economy of a people, this was it. After this outrageous charade, the leaders of the federal government of Nigeria sought to devastate the resilient and emerging eastern commercial sector even further by banning the importation of second-hand clothes and stockfish, two trade items that they knew the burgeoning market towns of Onitsha, Aba and Nnewi needed to re-emerge. Their fear was that these communities, fully reconstituted, would then serve as the economic engines for the reconstruction of the entire eastern region. The Enterprises Promotion Decree of 1974, also known as the Indigenization Decree, was ostensibly pushed through by the leaders of the federal government in order to force foreign holders of majority shares of companies operating in Nigeria to hand over the preponderance of stocks, bonds, and shares to local Nigerian business interests. The move was sold to the public as some sort of pro-African liberation strategy to empower Nigerian businesses and shareholders. The chicanery of the entire scheme, of course, was quite evident, having stripped a third of the Nigerian population of the means to acquire capital. The leaders of the government of Nigeria knew that the former Biafrans, by and large, would not have the financial muscle to participate in this plot. The end result, they hoped, would be a permanent shifting of the balance of economic power away from the east to other constituencies. Consequently, very few Igbos participated, and many of the jobs and positions in most of the sectors of the economy previously occupied by Easterners went to those from other parts of the country. Ironically, and to the consternation of Lord Wilson and the British Cabinet in England, the Enterprises Promotion Decree of 1974 also meant that the British Dutch conglomerate Royal Dutch Shell BP and other holdings valued at $720 million at the time would have to share ownership of oil investments with the federal government, the very development Wilson was trying to avoid by backing Gowon in the first place. For those who would defend Gowon's cabinet, suggesting that at times of war, measures of all kinds are taken to ensure victory, I will counter by stating that the Geneva Conventions were instituted after the Holocaust to make sure that human rights are still protected in times of conflict. There are many international observers who believe that Gowon's action after the war were magnanimous and laudable. There are tons of treatises that talk about how the Igbo were wonderfully integrated into Nigeria. Well, I have news for them. The Igbo were not and continue not to be reintegrated into Nigeria, one of the main reasons for the country's continued backwardness, in my estimation. Borrowing a large leaf from the American Marshall Plan that followed World War II and resulted in the reconstruction of Europe, the federal government of Nigeria launched an elaborate scheme highlighted by 3 R's for reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reconciliation. The only difference is that, unlike the Americans who actually carried out all 3 prongs of the strategy, Nigeria's federal government did not. The administrator of East Central States, Mr. Obabiasika, announced that Eastern Nigeria required close to £500 million to complete the reconstruction effort. None of us recall that he received anything close to a fraction of the request. What has consistently escaped most Nigerians in this entire travesty is the fact that mediocrity destroys the very fabric of a country as surely as a war, ushering in all sorts of banality, ineptitude, corruption, and debauchery. Nations enshrine mediocrity as their modus operandi and creates the fertile ground for the rise of tyrants and other base elements of the society by silently assenting to the dismantling of systems of excellence because they do not immediately benefit on specific ethnic, racial, political, or special interest group. That, in my humble opinion, is precisely where Nigeria finds itself today.